of Cox and Graziano Funeral Home located at 134 Hamilton Avenue, and as part of my family's commitment to the community, I come to you every Wednesday talking to people that matter, about things that matter, in a place that matters, right here in Greenwich. On this morning after the election, we congratulate First Selectman Tessie on his unprecedented sixth-term victory, as well as Selectman John Toner. And the rain has stopped. We are here talking to David Rabin, the CEO of the Greenwich United Way. So much to talk about because there's so many great works that you were involved in. So welcome to you.
Good morning, Jen. Thanks for having us on here today.
Happy to have you here. And also to all of our Facebook Live viewers this morning. So much to discuss, but I like to begin by telling us a bit about yourself. Who do we have on the air this morning?
Well, Jen, I'm from outside of Buffalo, New York, moved here about 35 years ago, and came to a great town that has been really good to my family and me over the years. Was in banking prior to this and decided it was time to really give back in a much more meaningful, deeper, broader way to the community that's been so good to us.
Well, I can't think of a better way than an affiliation with the United Way, but for those listeners and viewers out there who might not be familiar with the organization, tell us kind of overall, in an overarching way, what the mission of the organization is.
I'll give you two things. One is we ensure that every person in our community has the opportunity to be educated, healthy, and self-sufficient. And a quick way to describe how we do that, we find, we fund, we fix those needs in the town of Greenwich that our needs assessment, which drives everything we do, uncovers.
When you think of Greenwich, David, you don't think of immediate needs. I mean, it's just not what comes to mind. You don't think of holes or gaps in funding or education. You just think of this as kind of one of the most affluent zip codes in the country. But there are needs here. Well,
your second word in that sentence struck a chord with me. You said, when you think. Me personally, when I think of Greenwich, I think of the 20% of the folks, the 1 in 5 who do need help in some way, shape, or form. The 5% who do live below the federal poverty level. The 15% who are what we call ALICE, which stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, but Employed. So when you put those two numbers together, it's 20% of the folks in town of 60+ thousand.
That's a significant percentage.
It's a significant number of people who are perhaps a missed paycheck away from financial catastrophe.
Well, all the more reason I think it's wonderful that you're here this morning illustrating the needs in the community, because we have to clear up these misconceptions and really understand the nature of the town that we live and work in. And if you're not aware, you might not be inclined to help. So I think it's very good of what you're going to discuss with us today. But I want to talk about the term community investment process. That kind of goes hand in hand with the United Way. What is it? And what has this latest round of the needs assessment uncovered in our community?
Well, everything we do, the Greenwich United Way does, Jen, starts with our needs assessment. It's a deep dive into the community that's done every 5 years. We just finished one in 2016, last year. And every 2.5 years in between, we do an interim update. So in 2018 or so and a half, we'll start doing an interim update.
Is this a survey, David? Is it mailed home? How is the data collected?
Yes,
okay.
To all that.
Okay.
Surveys, phone calls, focus groups. It's a lot of volunteer hours that take this information, put it into a document that is the defining human needs statistical portrait for the town of Greenwich.
Okay. Well, give me an example of some questions that are asked and the specific data you're collecting.
Well, things we uncover. I guess the answers to that would be the things we uncover.
Okay.
And our priority areas for this year and what the needs assessment uncovered are 3 areas that we decided that the community investment process will address, and that is mental health, self-sufficiency, and early childhood education. Those are our priority areas for this cycle.
Mental health. We see that there was a lack of attention being given to mental health issues. I mean, we always know we fix the physical before the mental sometimes, but the body is a system, the body is a whole, and mental health is just as important as maintaining optimal physical health. Is it that people aren't asking for help? Is that there's not enough access to therapy or to psychological counseling? What was lacking here?
Yeah, I think there could be what the needs assessment shows that there are gaps in services.
Okay.
And that's what we uncover. That tells us where we have to drive our attention.
Now, self-sufficiency, the goal of any community should be to have its residents self-sufficient, have everyone employed. I mean, that's just the euphoric, ideal way. But when people are self-sufficient and able to help themselves over time, you see overall beneficial effects on the community at large.
Sure. That cycle stops, right? That cycle of having generation after generation being non-self-sufficient stops, and our programs are geared towards that.
Are they doing this, tackling this by helping people counsel for job interviews, or helping place people who need work with employers who are seeking bodies to fill positions? How do you bridge the gap of self-sufficiency?
Well, our needs assessment tells us where the gaps are, right? And our funded agencies. Let's talk about the community investment process.
Sure,
how that
absolutely.
works, and that may help answer that question a little bit. So, our community investment process we're in the throes of it right now. And what is it? People say, well, community investment process. What is that?
It sounds like a wonderful idea.
Well, since 1933, we've been doing this community investment process. The Greenwich
Wow,
United
so
Way.
this goes back quite some time. This
Yes.
is not new to Greenwich.
No, not at all. The community chest of Greenwich started in 1933, which became the Greenwich United Way in the 70s.
Okay,
So there's a little history.
quite a
lesson for you.
history here.
And our 85th anniversary is next year, and I'll plug our gala for next year. So October 13th, Friday, October 13th, 2018 is the Greenwich United Way's 85th gala.
Wow, I'm sure they'll be here before we know it.
But
It's very
absolutely,
scary.
right? But we're getting back to the community investment process. We're in the throes of it right
Okay.
now. We have 10 or 12 teams of community volunteers, two people per team, that have done a deep dive. And if you want to learn about the community of Greenwich in one of the best ways possible, I would recommend getting on our community investment process for next year.
So there's a council, the community, I mean, is that tied with your planning council? Or?
It is
Okay.
tied to the Community Planning Council for sure, but it's a group of people. Community Planning Council runs the needs assessment, develops the needs assessment, has monthly meetings, has great speakers at these meetings to raise awareness of the local needs in Greenwich,
Okay.
the local human services needs that we've discussed. So, community investment process, we're in the throes of it right now. It's these teams that do a site survey to the funded agencies that we partner with. They interview them, they look at their financials, they look at an application, they take all that information, and then they make a recommendation to our grants committee.
Okay.
So this is all going on right now, and by January, at our January board meeting, the grants committee prior to that will make recommendations to the board, and the board will approve or take a look at those recommendations and approve what they feel is proper.
Okay. What I find interesting is that your needs assessment stretches beyond the needs of the United Way and the needs of your organization. This is sometimes the only factual information that the town uses to assess the services and agencies
Sure.
that it has in the community. So your data is really stretching far beyond the United Way.
Oh, it does. We have great feedback. Anyone who's writing a grant in the town of Greenwich uses our needs assessment.
Okay.
Anyone who needs any information at all on human services data uses the needs assessment. The town of Greenwich, heavy user of the needs assessment. So it is a tool that is used far and wide, as you mentioned.
You're certainly doing your homework on the town. What I also like is, aside from the cross-referencing, it sounds like you're avoiding duplication of services. You're avoiding inefficiency. You're making sure that you're targeting an agency that is not being served by someone else.
Well,
There's truly a need for you to be servicing
That's
them.
one of the values, actually, great point, of the deep dive that we do with the community investment process, because they look at everything that has to do with that particular agency. And when you look at other agencies, part of the questions on the grant application is there duplicity of services?
Right.
And that's something that we look at certainly in the grant process.
Let's talk about some of the specific agencies that the Greenwich United Way has helped to fund and helped in any capacity.
I'd like to start with ones that the Greenwich United Way was very instrumental in founding and starting
Go right
and
ahead.
launching. And that would be, I'm sure we've all heard of Ableist. I'm sure
Yes.
we've heard of River House. We've heard of TAG, Transportation Association of Greenwich. We've
These
heard
are the
of
big ones.
Kids in Crisis.
Yes.
I mean, these are big ones in town, right? And if you look at our website, you'll see a list of programs and agencies that goes beyond those four to dozens of programs and agencies that are here today because of the work of the Greenwich United Way.
I think that's really important, David, that you're illustrating that, because everyone who has listened to the show has arguably heard of at least one, if
Yes.
not all, of those incredible organizations. So it's not that, it's a choice of supporting, because again, there's so many causes we can support. It's not a choice of this or that, but the Greenwich United Way is really the backbone behind all of these organizations. So supporting the United Way is really helping so many other community-based service and needs organizations.
Exactly. Because no one, unless you do the research yourself, Jen, you don't know where the best place to put your dollars is. That's why you trust the Greenwich United Way. We are that umbrella organization that does that research, does that deep dive into the community, and takes a look at where the money is needed the most in my explanation of the community investment process.
So going back to the Planning Council a little bit, so we've talked about the community investment process, we've talked about the needs assessment. So the Community Planning Council, a board of volunteers?
Yes, about 35 volunteers. Our board volunteer who runs that is the vice chair of Community Impact is Nancy Weisler.
Okay.
She's put together a terrific program. It runs this year. It runs from September to June, and we have 10 programs lined up every month, and they're community volunteers. They are leaders in the community of human services organizations, some folks with feet on the ground actually in the forefront, handling those human services needs. And the group is there to raise awareness, and it's doing a terrific job of that so far. We've talked about some of the topics are mental health actually. We've got a great lineup coming up. Our legislative breakfast, which is part of the Community Planning Council, is going to be on December 5th at Town Hall. And Scott France, Mike Pacino, Livy Florin, and
Great lineup.
Freddie Camillo will be there,
good.
along with Peter Tessie, to talk about human services needs and issues as they relate to the town of Greenwich. And it's a great forum for folks to ask questions. So I would recommend you give us a call and show up and be there to be involved and learn a little bit more about the Greenwich United Way, and also how our legislators are addressing the human services needs of the town of Greenwich.
I want to discuss that, and we're going to, at the end of the show, we'll go through all the upcoming events and the ways that our listeners and viewers can take part. But there has to be a nexus between the political climate up in Hartford and the agencies that you're servicing. Funding is being cut because there simply are no funds here in the state of Connecticut at large. So how has that impacted your work? Have you seen organizations that are in dire need of funds? Have you seen an immediacy and an urgency to supply needed revenues to these agencies?
Jen, the Greenwich United Way, let me say first and foremost, is 100% privately funded.
Okay.
So we receive no state grants, no federal grants, nothing like that. So 100% privately funded.
And that's wonderful.
And while it's a big thank you to the folks of the town of Greenwich that
Yes.
makes that happen for sure. We're very lucky in that regard. And I have a CEO roundtable 3 times a year, and that CEO roundtable consists of the CEOs of the nonprofits in town, and we get together 3 times a year, and our last one was October 5th, so just a few weeks ago. And this was one of the topics because we had Scott France there, we had Mike there, Mike Pacino, we had Freddie Camillo was there, and of course the most of the questions related to what your question to me just now. And the short answer is yes. We have heard that many of our local agencies are being drastically affected by the cuts in Hartford to their budgets.
Well, I commend you all the more for,
which by the way makes our job at the Greenwich United Way that much more important.
Right,
that
absolutely.
much more important, exponentially more important.
Because the money is still needed, despite the fact that the state can't satisfy the needs. The needs are still there,
Right.
So they have to come from somewhere. So again, a credit to what you're doing over at the Greenwich United Way. You know, you also talked about one of the needs in the community being early childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Let's discuss this. Is this early childhood education, the need for better resources for parents, you know, of young children? Are these financial needs? Are these also tied back to mental health needs? Where are we lacking with respect to early childhood?
Well, it starts with the achievement gap that I think has received quite a bit of press and in the past few years. Everywhere you go, you turn, the internet, the newspaper, it's there right in front of you, the achievement gap.
Talk about the achievement gap.
Well, when a child enters kindergarten, an at-risk child enters kindergarten in the town of Greenwich, we'll pick Greenwich because that's where we are.
That's where we are.
They are 18 to 30 percentage points behind their non-at-risk peer. That leaves them behind the entire way. They can never catch up. It's like a race all the way through school. They can never catch up. So we are working right now on a program that will help to close that achievement gap. And we haven't launched it yet. It's in the process of being developed and launching shortly. But it's a two-pronged approach to address that issue, which from birth to 3, the first 1,000 days of a child's life is the most important, Jen.
Very true.
First 1,000 days. If you don't get them then, it's really hard to catch up. So there's a program that we know very well, a data-driven solution that has been proven. It's 35 years old, proven to give that child the best start they can from that birth to 3 stage. And then there's another program, you couple that with a preschool, enriched preschool instructional program, you now have a child that goes through, an at-risk child that goes through birth to 3 and a 3 to 5 year program. They enter kindergarten, guess what?
The gap is bridged.
They are now on an even playing field with that non-at-risk peer.
You know, it's so true, and having a small child, the preschool process, what they're doing there, it's much different than what they did when I was in preschool. So then you can see where, if the gap is already there, if nothing's done to bridge it, you can see at that young age where if you don't do something, you can fall behind the rest of your life. But in your assessment of needs, what is accounting for the child that's on the other end and needing to cross that bridge? What's happening in our community that's causing so many children to start at this disadvantage?
Yeah. There's a lot of factors, and 3 things that define an at-risk child are English language learner, special needs, and free and reduced lunch probability.
Okay.
So those are the 3 things that define that. And you know, we have 4 Title I schools in town as well, and I'm sure you know what those are. And this program will give that child the best possible start they can, and we're just excited about it starting shortly.
Well, you'll have to check back in with us.
Oh, I plan on it.
So you mentioned, David, that you're 100% privately funded, again, through the generosity of so many Greenwich residents. But let's talk about funding specifically. Are there annual campaigns? Are there fundraising drives? Talk about the upcoming gala. Soul Sisters. Everyone in town has heard of the Soul Sisters event. Talk a bit about how you raise the needed funds.
Through everything you just said, Jen. So we have events. We just had our Brouhaha Comedy Night at Art Street. Rousing success, okay? Our events have been beating budgeted income for them, so we're grateful, so grateful to the support, of our Greenwich residents, for sure, and their friends and relatives and neighbors. And the annual campaign is the big one. So the mailings that go out, we make phone calls, we have the fundraisers, we have we just had a Dance for Champs at Greenwich Academy that Frank Carpentieri of Garden Catering and his wife Kate put together for us. It was a terrific event, brought whole new awareness to what we're doing. It brought in a whole new group of people for us. We had a couple hundred people there. It was a terrific couple-hour-long event. And it's things like that. It's finding new people like this radio show is doing right now, because your audience is going to be different than Tony Savino's audience, maybe. No offense, Tony, you're listening? I see you in the window there. You listening? So it may be a different audience. And it's about getting out there and continuing to raise the awareness of what the Greenwich United Way does. So thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. Delighted to have you here. So you're here, you're the CEO of this organization almost 2 years now, correct?
Yes.
Talk about Greenwich as you see it now versus Greenwich as you saw it when you began.
Oh, I'm looking at it through a whole different prism for sure. Although when folks say to me, "Oh, you're on the other side of the table now," I'm not on the other side of the table. I want to make that clear. We're all on the same side of the table. If we're here to keep Greenwich the great place it is to live, work, play, raise a family in, then we all are on the same side of the table, and we should all be working together to keep, to not let Greenwich forget about Greenwich, Jen.
And very true. And the community is comprised of all of its members. So when, and they say, much like a chain, when we help the weakest link of our chain, we strengthen the chain overall.
Sure,
so
right.
That's what you're doing in identifying these needs. So you said again in 2018 upcoming, there's going to be some type of interim review. Does that mean that we just do a little less work in terms of collecting data? There's not as much that goes out to, it's not a complete comprehensive survey, but we're just looking to fine-tune specific areas?
Yes, it'll be a much more of a high-level look than the full, because the full needs assessment is about 150 pages long of data and research and reports. There is an executive summary that comes out of it that is much easier to read. Yes, exactly right. Much easier to read. But if you really want the deep dive, you look at the 150 page, and it's really good reading and quite insightful. But the interim needs assessment is going to be, is much more brief than that, and takes a look at, where we are at that point. Has anything changed dramatically? Which it probably hasn't in 2 years, because things like that do take some time.
Yeah, nothing that significant, I would imagine. We talked about mental health, and we also talked about early childhood, but one of the things that I believe that you have found in your assessments also are substance abuse. And the opioid crisis, or epidemic as I call it, because I certainly believe it to be that. Are there programs that the United Way is working on to help families impacted by substance abuse, specifically to raise awareness for our youth? You have to start this young.
You do. One of our funded agencies, Liberation, the CEO is Alan Mathis. He's a great partner.
Yes, I've met Alan.
Do you know Alan?
Yes, I have.
How
Through
great
Greenwich
is Alan
Hospital.
Mathis,
Yes.
right? He's terrific. So I've met with him several times. In fact, tomorrow morning I'll be at a Liberation-sponsored event in Stamford, dealing directly with two speakers who are experts on the opioid crisis. Okay. So I kind of wish this show was on Friday morning. I could have given you a lot more information. But it's going to be a really educational event for the group as well. But it does have to start with young folks, right?
And the need is here. I mean, Greenwich is not immune to this.
Well, see, that's not a socioeconomic thing. So before, when I said, there's 20% of the folks in town who are a missed paycheck away from financial catastrophe, et cetera, that particular issue
doesn't apply here.
Yeah, exactly. So we have, through Liberation, we did for the first time in the history of the Greenwich United Way an extension grant after our initial grant process. In May, in January, we did an extension grant in May, and one of the programs we helped fund was placing someone from Liberation at the senior center to give a resource there for seniors to get more information and to help them, if they need